You can prevent a terrorist attack. I have. And I know if you look at me and if you know I'm a professor and of something useless like theology or philosophy, that doesn't seem very believable. But my colleagues and I prevented a suicide bombing that was going to happen in that big shopping center in Bristol. So whatever your background, you can prevent a terrorist attack. Doesn't matter if you're Muslim or non-Muslim or what background. In fact, so far, the biggest haul of explosive and weapons amassed to commit a terrorist attack in this country was amassed by a Christian who was a regular attender of his Anglican church, intending to kill as many Muslims as possible. It doesn't matter if you're not a police officer or a member of the security services or in government. In fact, if there's one thing that I've learned over the last 10 years of working in this area is we cannot leave this to governments. We cannot entrust them with preventing the recruitment of people to violent groups. In fact, there are particular reasons why you are more effective at preventing terrorist recruitment of any kind than MI5 or the security services in your country. But you do need a strategy. And while that might sound boring, there was a wonderful saying from Napoleon, which was, you might not be interested in strategy, but strategy is interested in you. This is called the Management of Savagery. And it came out in 2004. And it was the manual, so to speak, the strategy that the so-called Islamic State, ISIS, was going to use. So here are a few points of their strategy, as foretold in this manual. First of all, they want to draw the West into a deeper military conflict. They're not trying to avoid the bombing, quite the opposite. They want to suck other countries into Middle Eastern war so that we pour out our blood and pour out our money into this war. Secondly, another point they make is they want people to go for soft targets. What that means is us, not soldiers or assassinating presidents. They want to go for ordinary people like us, ordinary civilians. First of all, because they actually want us to drive our societies into a police state or a security state. So life becomes more and more intolerable for us, for the Muslims that live in those countries. And so that so much of our energy and resources get wrapped up in fighting them. Second reason, though, that they want to go for soft targets is because their key message is the persecution of all Muslims by non-Muslims. They want to turn non-Muslims against Muslims in outrage over the attacks, just as they're trying to turn Muslims against non-Muslims. And they want to persuade Muslims in other countries that they cannot live there, that it's impossible to live out your life and your faith in the country where you are because of the hostility of other people towards you, your faith, how you express it, how you dress. And another point of theirs is the Khilafah, or the Caliphate, because they want you to leave that country where you are and emigrate to what they claim is the Islamic State they've created, and they claim is an obligation on all Muslims to come and migrate and build that state. So those are some features of their strategy. Now, a lot of people will say the problem is the ideology. The problem is the ideology. It's not foreign policy. It's not poverty. It's not the alienation or the Islamophobia that people experience. It's all about the ideology. We have to eradicate the ideology. Well, I think that's not very helpful. Why? It's a bit like asking, why has there been a rise in teenage pregnancies, say? And if someone tells you, the explanation for the rise in teenage pregnancies is because more and more teenagers are having unprotected sex. Well, obviously they are. What we want to know is why. What we want to know is why some people are susceptible to this ideology and some people totally not. Now, unfortunately, for those people that want quick and easy answers and quick and easy solutions, and they don't want to spend too much time thinking about it, there are none. Academics, of course, and others have put forward lots of different reasons, and all of them seem kind of plausible, but they don't apply to different cases. And in the end, the British Security Service, or MI5s, concluded there's no one profile. There's no one pattern, there's no one type of person who becomes a terrorist, either of the far-right racist variety or of Al-Qaeda-inspired or ISIS types. There's no one type. But I've learned that there are common themes. Whether you're talking about a bedroom online fantasist warrior, or whether you're talking about someone who's already very alienated, already engaging in criminal activities, not at all religious, but then finds a cause and joins a violent group. All of them have something in common. And that is that for whatever reason, ISIS, or whatever group's targeting them, is meeting a need that hasn't been met in their lives in some more healthy way. It's meeting a need. Now, we all have core needs that go beyond air, food, water, shelter. We have psychological needs for a sense of belonging, for acceptance, for bonding with others. And we also have, I believe, higher needs for a sense of meaning, the need to have an impact on the world, to be able to make a difference. We also have a need to belong to something greater than ourselves, with a great mission and a great purpose. Those are higher needs that are not so easily met in our society. Of course, we also have desires that we can live without, but are very, very compelling for us. So we might have a need to belong, and that's what we need in order to be mentally healthy. But we have a desire that the group or the identity that we belong with is fantastic, is brilliant, is better than others, it's got the right answers. So we have further desires, and if people can tap into those desires, it can be so compelling as to be almost addictive. But also, a third thing is that we also crave a portrait of ourselves, an image of ourselves that we find appealing and satisfying or impressive. And if you can dangle that in front of somebody and say, here's who you are, here's who you can be if you come with us, that is about the most seductive message that you can hear. We all have our fantasies, but our fantasies, especially about ourselves, can be a great source of vulnerability. It can make us very vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who can read that fantasy. So if your fantasy is about glory, about power, about violence, about being a great warrior or a soldier, about achieving the sort of esteem and admiration of others, a lot of people are really bewildered. If we look at ISIS in particular, who's been so spectacularly successful in recruiting from unlikely sources, they're bewildered by why happy, well-adjusted, successful, intelligent teenagers, for example, girls and women, have fallen prey or been vulnerable to a recruitment by this group. And here's one thing to think about. This particular generation of teenagers, of young Muslims, are ones who have grown up in the shadow of those falling towers on 9/11 and 7/7. This is the generation that has grown up in the wake of the terrorist attacks and the war on terror. And while those attacks are horrific and evil, we also need to recognize the damage that they've done to Muslims themselves, who were not responsible, were not involved, and don't sympathize with those attacks. Not just 9/11, but 9/12. The impact on these people. If you stop and consider, if you're not Muslim, consider what it must be like to have spent your life growing up being told that you are a threat. And whatever support you've had from others, from your parents, from a small circle, the wider society is full of so many negative images about your being and your identity. Have you ever gone online and read the comments at the bottom of articles Any article to do with Muslims or security situations or terrorism, even in mainstream papers like The Guardian or The Washington Post, online, some of the comments are horrific, vicious. And these are the ones that make it past the moderators. And worse, they often go beyond just talking about specific terrorists, and you will find comments about all Muslims are like this, are deluded, or violent, or a danger, or a threat. Really vicious comments. Now, if those were about an individual, you would recognize it as terrible bullying. And we know that online bullying has made some people take their lives if they're young and very affected by it. The fact that it's talking about a group and doesn't name you does not make a difference. It's still about you. ISIS, in contrast, when it's reaching out to young people, it is full of positive messages about them. It values them. It takes them seriously. It addresses their concerns. It positively love bombs them. When they engage with someone through online media, they have a whole suite of volunteers doing this. When they engage with someone, they can spend literally hundreds of hours in one-to-one contact, responding to questions, responding to the challenges or the reservations that people make. They also like to show their soft side. There was a whole Twitter account about cats in the Islamic State, which was taken down. And this picture, this poor little kitten, was rescued from bombed-out ruins by this wonderful man who's so manly and so caring. Recruiters know something that salespeople know, and I suspect a few politicians know it as well. If you can articulate the truths about someone's existence and get it right, you've got them hooked. If you can describe something about their life and you hit the nail on the head, you've suddenly gained in credibility. The one thing that they've talked about that you know about, they were right. It was true. So when they go on to talk about other things you're not so sure on, you begin to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so if ISIS recruiters talk about the aggression and the hatred that they face as Muslims in a non-Muslim majority country, and that is their experience, then they are credible. What this means is that if our societies are full of antagonism, or full of bullying, or full of misrepresentation, terrorist recruiters are credible. The same thing can be said for racist, nativist, supremacist groups. What that means, therefore, is that we have the power to make terrorist messaging true or false. So what should that mean for our counterterrorism strategy, our strategy to prevent recruitment to violent groups? First thing I would say is don't spin a counter-narrative. And here I'm going against years and years of government strategies because it's been a feature for many years in this country, in America, and other countries that we have to have a counter-narrative. What that means is that Al-Qaeda and now ISIS have put together a particular narrative of the story they tell, the history of the world, right down to the experience of local Muslims, that makes sense within their lens of people's experience and the events of history. Heroes and villains, as you would imagine. And so a key plank of many countries' counterterrorism strategy is to have a counter-narrative. I think there are some things wrong with this. And one, I have to say, is that I've never come across a counter-narrative thrilling enough to compete with what they can come up with. We'd do better with Call of Duty or something like that to give people that sense of adventure. Another problem with it is that many people who are attracted to violent or extreme groups obviously have a bit of the rebel about them, a bit of an anti-authoritarian streak. So pumping out the government message, which they have to take on board, is bound to fall flat. So in fact, we should be encouraging criticism of our governments, criticism of the establishment, which naturally they would like to discourage. Instead of trying to spin some counter-narrative, what we need to do is demonstrate that the terrorist message whichever side of terrorism it is false through our action. We need to create the reality that demonstrates that what they're saying is not true. Do you know one of the things that is making ISIS most furious at the moment over these last few months? It's not actually the threat of bombing. It's the mass refugee crisis coming from Iraq and Syria. They are absolutely livid about it and are trying to put out their counter-narrative, their counter-propaganda about it in their magazine. Why? Well, one reason actually is a very practical reason, because a lot of their revenue and income comes from extortion and taxation on the local people. So the more people leave, the more money they lose. But another reason, remember, is that what they say is, this is the Islamic State. All Muslims have to make hijrah. They have to migrate and come here because they can't live with non-Muslims in the West. And here are hundreds of thousands of people desperate to get out of their so-called Islamic State and come to the West and live in common with non-Muslims. So refugees are destroying the ISIS message by their actions. Although that depends on us and our response to them. Wouldn't it be interesting, especially given some of the comments and the political climate of the moment, wouldn't it be interesting if one of the most effective things that we could do to counter ISIS globally would be to welcome as many refugees as possible and welcome them as warmly as possible and make them safe and welcome in our countries until it's safe for them to go back and create the country they desire? Wouldn't that be ironic? Second thing that we need to do in our counter-terrorist strategy of the people, unlike the government, don't mass market propaganda. A mass message will not work. Instead, you have to give people personal attention. And a lot of it. Now, it's commonly said, it's a cliche, isn't it, that you can't change other people, you can only change yourself. That's not entirely true. You can often change other people. And you already know how. Meet their needs, tap into their desires, and offer them a picture of themselves that is attractive to them. Because people will change if it meets their needs and desires to do so. The recruiters know that. People in cults know that. You need to know that. And finally, another way that I'm going against the grain and saying the counterterrorism strategy of the people has got to be different from the counterterrorism strategy of the war on terror and the governments. Don't preach about values. Shared values, British values, American values, and you must all subscribe to them and uphold them. I'm all for values. But values only convince us if we see you living by them. If you want to know what someone's values are, don't read their speeches. Just follow them around for a few days. You will see what they really value. In fact, if our politicians and leaders really lived out a commitment to peace and to justice, to social justice, to economic justice, to international justice, then ISIS would only appeal to psychopaths. It's precisely because people don't see our leaders living out the values that they have that they join violent groups of one kind or another. And then you find that they can justify brutality and excessive violence because it's a means to an end to achieve their values. So instead of preaching about values, we need to talk about vision. We need to create a vision and a cause that people find compelling and attractive. And that means it needs to be a vision that will include everyone who is part of our society, including those who are alienated and marginalized. It needs to be a vision that young people can create, and we need young people to contribute to. And it needs to be a vision that everyone can participate in and contribute to. So here's what you need to do, personally, each one of you, to stop recruiting to terrorist groups or violent groups. You need to undermine terrorist or racist propaganda by living out the reality of the opposite. You need to create a climate that is inclusive and positive and welcoming. You need to create a shared vision, and you need to build relationships between people on the ground. So you need to think through what your vision is for the society you want to live in, and you need to communicate it to other people. You need to demonstrate, if you believe it's true, that people from different faiths, non-faiths, different backgrounds can live together. And a very effective tactic in this strategy is to give other people positive experiences of you. Whatever your background is, someone from a different background, ethnic group, religion to yours, needs to have positive experiences of you, again and again. This has actually been shown to be the most effective way to deconstruct people's unconscious prejudices. Because basically the reality that they experience of you doing this is going to override the beliefs that they've come to share. So I want you to think of one thing you can do to undermine and destroy the terrorist messaging. And create the society that you want to live in. Thank you.